it.
Huh?
Yeah, that's gotta be it. Welcome to the Duck Boat Tour. We're going to the Big Island of Hawaii. If you've been on a duck boat tour, you know that the bus becomes a boat. No guarantee this will float.
Good morning.
We survived.
Good. Okay, so you want to start?
Yes.
Okay, you're going to start with me, and you know what? We'll start in the beginning. Okay, we'll start in the rotunda here. This kind of a lot of aviation first. So we're going to point out a couple, and we're going to start. When did it all start? And there's a dispute with it. We do have a hang glider up here, and we're going to talk about that when we get into Da Vinci. Okay, so that goes back to about 1500. But when did it really officially begin? It began in 1783 with a French family. Two brothers, the Montgolfier brothers, with the balloon, okay? And we have a model of it, a representation of it right over here. Okay, now, that balloon was very, very large. It was as high as the ceiling, and half the width of this building. It was a huge balloon. Now, a little historical background. Hot air balloon, how did it start? They were in the paper business, okay? They noticed whenever they burnt paper, the ashes went up. And they said, hey, maybe there's a gas we don't know about, but let's see if we can harness it. So they built a small little box, put a flame under it, and it elevated. And from there, they got bigger and bigger, and they started to get a reputation. King Louis XVI heard about them. He wanted a demonstration flight. So in September 1783, they show up in Versailles with their big balloon, and King Louis says he's a big humanitarian. He says, we'll put prisoners in it. And they said, no. So the first flight was with a duck, a chicken, and a sheep, okay? And it went up, traveled a couple thousand feet, went down a couple miles. 2 months later, it was the first manned flight, untethered. They did one before with a tether. I was the first one. It was a physics professor and a military man. And they did the first untethered flight. So in essence, that's when we recognize finally leaving the planet. What's interesting with it is that this problem they had with the hot air balloon is the same problem you have today with a hot air balloon. You can't control where it's going, okay? So that becomes the next thing to kind of tackle. But I like to talk about first, and how about if you just miss it, you're second. 10 days after Montgolfier brothers do their official flight, right? Another Frenchman named Jacques Charles was able to harness hydrogen, which is a very, very complicated process at that time.
So what's happening?
I'm starting here.
Okay.
He's in World War II.
Understood.
So you're going to start in
going to
one?
go to one.
Go ahead. Oh, okay.
Okay, so he already started.
Yeah.
We have an independent mind type of
Well, Maud started there, and I thought, okay. So you go with, Phil's going that way, then one, okay. Okay, well anyway, let's get back to it. So 10 days later, this Frenchman, Jacques Charles, is able to harness hydrogen, and he creates the first hydrogen-filled balloon. He actually went up in the balloon, and it was a much smaller balloon, and it was very successful, and historically, it's probably more significant than the hot air balloon, but because he was second, he kind of lost in the history. The interesting thing now, so we credit the Montgolfier brothers with doing the first flight. The interesting thing is that they were very brave with other people's souls. One of the brothers never went in the balloon, and the other one only went tethered, okay? So they never did go in a free flight. So 1783, we have the first time we're really in the air, but we have to control our flight. So the next 100 years, we're looking at controllable flight. And there was a fellow in Germany named Otto Lilienthal, and he was known at that time as the Flying Man, and he was working on basically hang gliders. And we have a model of one of his right behind us. This is his, oh, you know what? Let me put my microphone on. We kind of started early and I forgot to put it on. Okay, so this is his 11th design. He had 16 different designs, and in essence, it's a hang glider. Now, he had a little bit more controllability in that he was able to control the flight by shifting his weight, okay? So he had a little bit more, but not a lot. Unfortunately, he was killed in about his 2000 flight. He was in a sharp descent, and it's very difficult to shift your weight backwards when gravity is winning the battle when you're flying forward. So he was killed. He died about 8 days after his crash. Whether he said it or not, on his tombstone it says sacrifices must be made. So they kind of accredited him with doing that. But we had a little bit more of control with that 100 years later. In North America, there was a fellow, actually in California, he did a lot of his flying in San Francisco and in San Diego, named John Montgomery. And he was working on gliders in North America. So he's really credited with the first. And we have John Montgomery over here, and he did a lot of it in San Diego. We have a plaque in San Francisco, which is South Bay, where he did his flying. We have a high school named after John Montgomery High School, and we have the airport, one of the airports here, named after Montgomery. We do have his 1911 glider up here. And what's significant with Montgomery is, besides his gliding, he's flying his wing curvature. And it's real important when you're looking at lift. So he really was working on that. Unfortunately, he was killed in his 55th flight. Okay? So, when we jumped to Montgomery, you only mentioned because he was with Lilienthal. But after Lilienthal, we'll go ahead, 1880s, 1890s, we had out of Lilienthal doing that. Now we're going to jump a little bit ahead to 1909. I'm sorry, we're going to jump ahead to the significance with Lilienthal was he documented everything. He was very good at documenting all his flights, what worked and what didn't work. After he died, a couple of brothers from Ohio got a hold of his journals, the Wright brothers. So they were able to build a wind tunnel, and they were able to see what of his design worked and what of his design didn't work. So they were, moving around with it, and really Lilienthal was kind of a mentor to them in that sense. So in 1902, they come up with a glider, and we're going to have to step back to see it. And it is right over here. And what's significant with that glider is it is the first time now that we have the 3 phases of flight. We have pitch, yaw, and roll with that. So really now we're getting into controllable flight. Even though it was a glider, we had that control. Now the way that they did the yaw with the wings is the wings actually flex the way a bird move its wings this way. So it didn't have ailerons, but the wings themselves would actually warp to have that phase of flight. They did about 1,000 flights in this glider, or one similar to it, to perfect it. In 1903, they put an engine on it, and we have the Wright Flyer with the engine, and that you have to crane your neck to look up, because it's way up here. And we have the engine here, and we have the horizontal stabilizers at the front, the vertical stabilizers at the back. The plane is moving in that direction, so it's a little bit different than the traditional way we look at it in an airplane. A couple things about the Wright Flyer. The engine was built by one of their mechanics. Charlie Taylor was his name. Now you can imagine if I came to you and said, hey, you know what? I think I need an 8 horsepower engine. Could you build me one? That in itself is a feat. You couldn't order it from Amazon. And the engine itself is a little unusual. It does not have spark plugs. So it's set up in a different configuration than what we would normally think of an engine. So Charlie Taylor is able to get that engine on there, and the Wright brothers make their first successful power flight. Orville flew first, Wilbur was second, then Wilbur. Why did Orville go first? They flipped the coin. He won the coin toss, so he went first, okay? Wilbur was the last one to fly. Unfortunately, that was the longest flight, but he crashed it a little bit, and then a gust of wind came and turned it over. And so the Wright Flyer never flew again. The Wright Flyer only flew one day. And you think, oh, once you got it up there, you would fly. It only flew one day, and it never flew that high. Okay? Why they put it up there, we complain about it, because you kind of crane your neck to look at it. It maybe didn't fly any higher than the wing on the Spirit of St. Louis. So it never really flew that high. Now, of course, this is without its fabric on, right? But some of the fabric from the Wright Flyer did fly again. A piece of it went with Apollo 11 to the moon, and we actually have that in our display. And there's a piece of the Wright Flyer on the helicopter on Mars. So they didn't fly again, but some of the fabric flew again. So this is 1903. We have our first powered flight, okay? Now, well, we're doing this in America. You know, they weren't sitting on their tails in Europe doing nothing. They were coming up with things. So we're going to go from 1903 to 1909, and we have this plane over here. This is built by Louis Valerio. It's his 11th design, and what you'll notice is it really starts to look like an airplane, okay? It's got a single wing, it has a fuselage, a vertical, horizontal cage, stabilizer in the back, the engines in the front. Really starts to look like it. Now, if you look at the wings, you'll see these wires attached. Once again, they were using wing warping, okay? That's how they were able to flex the wings to get their motion. They didn't have the ailerons yet on this plane. The significance of this plane is it was the first plane to fly the English Channel. Okay, and there was at that time, there was a 1,000-pound reward if you would be the first to fly from France to England and England to France. And Valerio was able to do that in his 11th design. So what does that mean? It means he had 10 previous, right? We talk about timing, like with poor Jacques Charles with the hydrogen balloon. Well, how about some timing with this? He has 10 designs prior to this. He's running out of funding. His wife is in France, in Paris. A child is falling off a balcony. The wife breaks the fall of the child. The parents say, we're so grateful. What can we do? You know, is there anything we can do? And Valerio says, hey, I'm running out of little cash. I could use some money from my next design. It becomes the 11th, and it becomes the most really important plane at that time frame. They made about 900 of them. So it was really the most successful frame with that. And it happens to be important, you know, in that it was the first one also. So, 1909, that's over in Europe. Now we're going to go 2 years later, 1911, okay? For that one, remember I pointed out the glider that Montgomery was doing, but this plane right above us, right here, it says Fin-Viz, 1911. It is a Wright Brothers plane. And guess what? Looks like a Wright Brothers plane, right? Doesn't look anything like Valerio's plane. Really starts to look like the Wright Brothers Flyer, but now we do have the horizontal vertical stabilizer in the back, so it's starting to take on a little bit more traditional function. Once again, it does not have ailerons, so it uses wing warping, okay? So, why do we have this plane hanging here? There was a $50,000 reward by William Hurst if you be the first to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay, $50,000, but you had to do it in 30 days or less. Well, a fellow named Cal Rogers says, I will take the challenge. He buys this plane from the Wright brothers. It's the first time the Wright brothers sold a plane to a private individual. They taught him how to fly. In 90 minutes, he got his pilot's license, okay? Now, he needs some money. The Armour Company has a grape drink that they're trying to, that they want to advertise called Fin-Viz, the ideal grape drink. They tell Cal Rogers, we're going to give you $5 a mile to put that on your plane to help fund it. Now that was a lot of money in 1911, right? But why would they give him the money? Only 2% of the population had ever seen an airplane. So if you knew an airplane was coming in your neighborhood, you were going to go out to see it. So in that sense, it was going to work. So Cal Rogers takes on the challenge. How's he going to find his way from New York to California? He's going to follow the railroad tracks. Right? He didn't have GPS, so he's going to follow the railroad tracks, which kind of brings him all over the place with it. So they have a special 3-car train he has. One car has the mechanics, 3 mechanics. One of them is Charlie Taylor, who built the engine for the Wright brothers. The second car has the material to rebuild the plane, and the third car has the family. So Cal Rogers takes off, and he's gung-ho to get that 50 grand, right? And after 30 days, guess where he is? Kansas. I don't think he ran into Dorothy there, but he's in Kansas, okay? So he's not going to get the money, but he continues the trip. He ends up getting out here to Long Beach. Took him 49 days, 75 individual flights, and he crashed 16 times, broke both of his legs and his collarbone, okay? But guess what? Hearst didn't give him the money because it was over 30 days. But he did give him a participation trophy, okay? In essence, I call that today, you know. And Cal Rogers said, keep the trophy. I don't want it. So anyway, so the significance is it's the first plane to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast. Unfortunately, about 4 months later, he's flying off of Long Beach, hits a flock of birds, crashes, and dies. So we have Lilienthal died flying, Montgomery died flying, Cal Rogers dies flying. So there's a lot of blood and guts in this early aviation. So 1911. Now we're going to jump 16 years later, 1927, to San Diego, when a young man named Charles Lindbergh shows up and he says, hey, there's a prize of $25,000 if you're the first to fly from New York to Paris or Paris to New York. I'm going to try to do it, okay? Comes to San Diego, contacts the Ryan Aviation Company. He has a budget of about, what was it, $10,000 was his budget. Can you build me a plane? And they said, yep, we think we can, okay? And they took a design from one of their earlier planes that was very successful, and we come up with the Spirit of St. Louis right here. So, the money that Lindbergh had came from St. Louis, so that's why it's named the Spirit of St. Louis, but it was built in San Diego by the Ryan Aviation Company. Interesting thing about it is you look at it, doesn't have any forward-facing window, okay? That's where there's the oil and the fuel in the front of that. And there's fuel in the wings, because he's going to need, they put about 450 gallons of fuel into the airplane to make the flight. So he's looking outside the windows, okay, and he does have a periscope right there. So there is a little periscope that's mounted that he can see from inside the cockpit outside. Whether he used it or not, he probably didn't use very much because he was used to actually flying and looking outside of the window. So Lindbergh takes the challenge. He does it in 33 and a half hours. He makes the flight. What's the toughest part about the flight? A couple of things. Number one, you had to stay awake 33 and a half hours, which was tough on itself. Number two, he didn't have GPS, so he had preset compass settings. Actually, his compass, he had ran into a storm, he lost it for a little bit, and he just wanted to continue flying straight and then get back on course. So that's the way he did it. He became delusional later on in the flight. He actually thought someone else was in the airplane. Finally saw the lights of Ireland, and he said, boom, and he's able to do it, and he ends up he lands in Paris, and he really is the first rock star, okay? He is the biggest celebrity by far at that particular time. And, you know, he was an interesting character. Now, I'll tell you something interesting about it. I like to tell stories out to people. So Lindbergh is he's a hero, right? And he's married to Anne Morrow, okay? And he has a child, Charles Lindbergh Jr., who was kidnapped and murdered, and it was known as the crime of the century. But he had 5 additional children with Anne Morrow. A lot of people don't realize he had 6 children total with Anne Morrow. Now, he's a big celebrity, and he likes Germany. He does a lot of work in Germany, okay? But he doesn't speak German. He needs an interpreter. And he gets a female interpreter in Germany. And guess what happens? He has 2 kids with her, okay? But he really likes Germany. He finds another woman in Germany, has 3 with her. Oh, he's not done. He must have really liked her sister because he had 2 with her sister. So we know when he died, he had at least 13 children. The 7 in Germany did not know him as Charles Lindbergh, knew him as Carew Kent. Okay, I said the way he's popping them out, he could have been Clark, like Superman with these kids, right? So, and the kids didn't, they thought that Lindbergh was their father, and it wasn't until the 90s, through the DNA ancestry thing, that they were able to kind of confirm that he was their father. They didn't want any claim to the estate or anything. They just wanted to know why we all looked like Lindbergh. So that happened. So here he is. He's a great, great man in one sense, but maybe a little flawed in his morality the other sense. So you don't read about that. Most people think he had the one child. And the one last thing I mentioned about it is, see these flags on the side of the plane? They weren't there on the original flight, okay? The original flight didn't happen. This was after the Spirit came back and they did Goodwill, a tour through South America, okay? And I'm of the thinking that his pants, the only time they were down probably wasn't in Germany. So we can have some other kids floating around that he had when he was visiting all those other countries. That I can substantiate, I just said yes. Okay. So 1927. 20 years later, 1947, we have this bullet-shaped orange plane right here. That's the Bell X-1. Significance, it's the first plane to break the sound barrier, okay? It was dropped from a B-29 bomber. It was powered by a 4-chamber rocket engine, just fired sequentially to get up to speed and to finally break the sound barrier. Because once you break it there, it becomes difficult to control. So that's why it took a long time for them to do it. Now the interesting thing, remember the Wright Flyer flew one day. The Bell X-1 flew 50 times before it broke the sound barrier. A story about timing and everything. The fellow who was doing most of the testing was named Slick Goodwin, okay? And he was a test pilot, and he got up to Mach 9.98. And they want to break the sound barrier. And he says, I want $100,000 to do it. And Bell and the Air Force said, we're not paying you $100,000. Who's next on line, right? A fellow named Bob Hoover. Hoover's there, but Hoover goes out the week before and does something, and General Cardenas pulls him out of the line, and who's next on line? Chuck Yeager, okay? So there it is, so timing is everything. Meanwhile, poor Slick Goodwin there, that $100 grand cost him $1 million later on, because if he decided to do it, he would have been famous. Now he's just a footnote in history. So 20 years after this, we're building the Apollo capsule and we're getting ready to go to the moon. So in a 100-year span, we went from a hang glider, Lilienthal's hang glider, to going to the moon, which is just fascinating when you look at it in that time frame. So now we're going to go back 500 years and we're going to talk about Da Vinci. 1947. 1947 was the first time that the sound barrier was broken in a controlled flight. There were records in World War II where a plane was shot down and he was in a dive and it actually went faster than the speed of sound. Just checking time because I know we got to get out by noon. So let's talk about Da Vinci. Okay, fascinating character. Born April 15th, 1452. April 15th to the Americans is an important day. Why?
Tax day.
Tax day. Two other things that are of importance historically happened April 15th. Okay? One in 1865. One in 1912. 1865, Lincoln. Okay? He's actually shot the 14th, died the 15th. The Titanic hit the iceberg the 14th, sunk on the 15th. Okay? And getting back to Blériot, the first woman to fly the English Channel was Harriet Quimby. She flew it April 16, 1912. When she landed, she thought there'd be a lot of hoopla, right? First woman to do it. But the Titanic sunk the day before, so she wasn't even on the third page of the newspaper. So once again, timing is kind of everything. So we'll get back to Da Vinci. We know what day he was born. Now, if you look at the book, we have 3 of them in here. You'll notice the writing. And it is backwards, okay? He wasn't dyslexic, but he was left-handed. And if you write backwards left-handed, you don't smudge the ink. Okay? So he does that. The other thing, he's secretive about what he's doing. So by writing backwards, unless you were smart enough to get a mirror, okay, you didn't know what he was writing. He could write correctly, so if he wanted to meet you for lunch, he could send you a note correctly. So he could write backwards and he could write forwards. He had an IQ of between 180 and 220. Okay, we're not sure, but he's up there in his IQ. He was illegitimate. Why is that important? At this time frame, the firstborn son would have taken on the profession of the father. His father was a notary. Okay, so by being illegitimate, he was able to go off on his own. Okay, he was a vegetarian. Once again, 500 years ago, kind of interesting, and he was gay. So he's the true Renaissance man. He had everything covered. Okay. So now we're going to go in and we're going to talk about some things about his ideas on flight, the weather, and a couple little paintings we'll mention as we mosey on through. So this exhibit is kind of small the way it is, so we kind of have to stay together. We'll go through the arc right here and start with it.
Where's the restaurant?
What's that?
The restaurant.
The restaurant.
That way.
Yeah, if you go that way, and it's against the back wall. Okay. No, yeah, you can do whatever. We'll be here. Okay, so we're talking about Da Vinci. From a very early age, he was interested in flight. He wanted to know why do birds fly, how do they fly, how do bugs fly. So he would study them, and what he came up with is, looking at a bird's wings when it flew, he noticed that it extended its feathers when it lifted up, and it closed them when it came down. So he said, well, we get the air through, and then we collapse it so we can get some lift. So he said, if man is going to eventually put some wings on, we got to take that into consideration. So he comes up with this concept behind us, and this big wing here, and there's a flap. And as the wing is going up, the flap is open, the air goes through it. As it comes down, it closes, so you get more lift, right? These are all conceptual things he was doing. He didn't build a lot of these things. They were all in his codices, his journals that he was doing it. But that was one of his ideas. Another idea, he had the same principle, is kind of a wing with shingles where you get, the air goes through, and as it comes down, you're going to get that lift. Now, a couple things that he did was, if you're going to fly, you had to consider the weather. And this is where he's done some fascinating stuff, and we're going to mosey around this corner here. Okay, so as we all come around here, make our turn, and turn here, there we go. So while we're here, I want you to look too, we're going to go back to Da Vinci, but I want you to look at this space capsule above us. That is the Mercury space capsule. We really can't see it well from space in the exhibit here. So you can look at it here. We do have one on the ground that you're free to get into later and see how tiny it was. You're out. Half you guys can never fit in this thing, okay? Yeah. But that's how small it was, but we'll talk about it more in space. So, what does Da Vinci come up with? If we're going to fly, we got to consider the weather. Da Vinci comes up with the first hydrometer, the first way to measure humidity. Imagine, this is 550 years ago. How does he do it? Ingenious. He comes up with a scale. On one side of the scale, he has wax. On the other side, he has cotton. The wax and cotton weigh the same amount. Wax does not absorb moisture, cotton does. Da Vinci's able to tell you whether it's going to rain or not, okay? By the cotton absorbs it. Fascinating stuff. What else does he do? He comes up with wind pressure. We'll talk about speed in a bit, but he comes up with a way to measure the pressure by coming up with a couple cones, different sizes, and a little fan wheel, okay? And he's able to tell kind of what the wind pressure is going to be. Now, if you're going to fly, you have to know which direction the wind is going in, right? Okay? What does he come up with? Something that today we are so familiar we don't even think about it. A weather vane. Okay? So you got to know which way the wind is blowing. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. At this time, 500 years ago. Now, so he's thinking of flying, can be strong enough, what are we going to do with the wings? And he comes up with a kite idea. The kite idea is this big circle behind us. It's a big, big kite, okay? And in the middle, you'll see there's a man. And that man is in another circle, a smaller circle, okay? And as the wind is grabbing this outer kite, the man in the middle is standing kind of upright in a smaller circle. In essence, what does he come up with? The first? Gyroscope, right? He kind of comes up with the first gyroscope. Fascinating kind of design. Now, that's his flight stuff. So we're all thinking now, that's great, how did he make a living? 12 years old, he's an apprentice in sculpturing and painting. He's 21 years old, he's contacted by a monastery, and these monks say, hey, we want you to do a painting of the Annunciation when the Archangel Gabriel is going to tell Mary she's going to have Jesus. Da Vinci says, I'll take it. He gives the monks a drawing. of what he's going to do, and in the drawing, Gabriel's wings are 14 feet long, okay? Because Da Vinci says that's how long you have to be to get a guy up that size, okay? Now the monk said, you know what? That's too much wings. He's an angel. Shorten those wings. He can go with shorter wings. So the wings are short. Now Da Vinci, to give you a sense of motion, you notice the plants in front of Gabriel are knocked down, right? He's trying to give you a sense of motion. Right here, he gives you distance perspective, which is unusual at that time. Not everyone's doing it. Further back things look, the fainter they are in color and in outline. Also, if you look at it with the lines here, they're kind of pointing to that area, so you get more of a perspective of that. Now, the fascinating thing about the painting is look at Mary's arms. Look at her left arm and look at her right arm. They kind of don't look like they belong on the same body. That right arm looks a little bit larger and distorted. Done on purpose. Why was it done on purpose? Da Vinci says to the monks, where's the painting going? They said, high on the ceiling and in the corner. Da Vinci says, okay, to view it, I'm going to have to look from here to see that painting. If I'm going to do it at that angle, the arm has to be painted this way to look anatomically correct from that angle. So, kind of a fascinating thing. There was another fellow at this time frame too, and they were antagonists. They weren't friends. And that was Michelangelo. And if you look at the Sistine Chapel, if you get up close, those figures are distorted. But from down below with the curvature, they look anatomically correct. So these guys were way, way ahead of anybody else at this time. So that's how he's able to make a living while he's monkeying around with everything else, right? Now, we're going to go around the corner, and you're going to see a guy that looks like he's there for bayonet practice. But I assure you, he's not. Okay, here he is right here. Here is our World War I bayonet practicing thing. No, it's not for that. What is it? Da Vinci knew that if a bird stopped flapping its wings, what's going to happen?
Fall.
It's going to fall. And he knew that if we were eventually going to put wings on, there's a good chance we're going to crash, right? So what does he come up with? The first airbag system, okay? Before the car, Da Vinci has the airbag system. He says if we put these bags on around our legs or arms or our neck, if we crash, we're going to minimize the damage. So he's way ahead of his thinking. Now, that's his flight. Now remember on the other side, we had humidity, wind direction, and wind pressure. I said wind speed, that's behind us here. Look at this wonderful thing he comes up with. Simple invention. He's got this flap, he has it gauged off. With a constant wind, he's able to tell the wind speed. So he's really the first meteorologist when we look at it like that. Now, I know you guys are the Astronomy Club. Any pilots in it? Okay. Not that we have to be, I'm not a pilot at all. But you've all seen a cockpit, and in the cockpit there's an artificial horizon. That's that ball with the blue kind of half and then the ground on the other side, and you're trying to keep that plane steady. Da Vinci comes up with the first artificial horizon, right here. Once again, ingenious. He has a dome. It's sealed, so the outside conditions can't affect it. In the middle, he's got a pendulum. He said, I'm going to put that in front of my pilot. He's going to be able to tell his orientation by looking at that pendulum. So really fascinating stuff. He's not done though. He comes up with the first drone. He's got this self-flying machine over here where he has a spool and this cone, and the rope is constantly feeding itself, which gets these two wings to constantly go. Once again, he didn't build any drone to spy on his neighbors. These are all concepts that he came up with, but he was thinking of that. Now, you're probably thinking, but he didn't do the helicopter. No, he did a helicopter. Right here, he's got the helicopter. This is kind of his big helicopter design, right? It's a big kite. This is a real small model. In the bottom, there's a spring, and there are 4 pegs. 4 men would be moving that until that spring is fully cocked. It would be released. It would start to spin. It would release here, and boom, 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 boom. We got ourselves our first helicopter. So he's all over the place. Now, remember, he had to make a living. 21 years old, he does the Annunciation. 50 years old, a rich Italian shipping merchantman, a Mr. Giaconda, comes to him and says, Da Vinci, I'd like you to paint a portrait of my wife. And we know his wife's name is Lisa. Okay? Da Vinci says, okay, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it differently. If you had money at that time and you wanted a portrait done, it was full length in the fancy clothes. Da Vinci says, I'm going to do Lisa three-quarter pose in very simple dress. Why? Bring attention to her face, okay? Which he's done. And if you look at it, he paints an expression where you don't know what the expression is. Is she smiling? Is she frowning? We're not quite sure with it. The other thing with the painting, it's 30 inches by 20 inches painted on wood. A little different than a canvas painting. If you look at it, it looks kind of foggy. And that's done on purpose. It's called fumato. It's a technique where you take darks and lights and you blend them together to get a smokiness to the picture. So this was all done on purpose. Now, the sad part of the painting, Mr. Gioconda never got it. Okay? Da Vinci started in Italy. He finished it in France. Okay? Gioconda never got it, so he never got to see his wife on the wall. But a famous Frenchman woke up in the morning to this painting on the wall. And that famous Frenchman had a complex. And I know you know who he is. Napoleon. Napoleon had the Mona Lisa hanging in his bedroom. Okay, so he got to look at it. Gioconda paid for it. Napoleon got to look at it. They say today, if it was to come up for sale, it'd be in the $1 billion range. So it's by far the most expensive and most famous painting in the world. Okay, so now we're going to get back to flight. Remember in the beginning, I pointed a little glider out. Da Vinci. This is a full-scale model of Da Vinci's hang glider, 39 feet wingspan. Supposedly in 1506, an apprentice of his named Tommaso Giovanni Massini flew this off a cliff, 600 feet, crashed, broke his leg, never flew again. They say there are eyewitness accounts that it occurred. There's actually a plaque in Italy where this supposedly happened. But a lot of people say it never could have happened. He could have gone 600 feet straight down, okay, but he wasn't going forward very far. So that's why we officially say the Montgolfier brothers. But I'm Italian, so I'm going to say, why would he lie? He did it, okay? He did it. Now, so 1506, remember he's got the airbag system? What else did he do in 1506? A parachute. He knew if you were going to fly, you were going to crash. So he comes up with a parachute. A couple hundred years later, a Frenchman jumps out of a hot air balloon with that parachute, and guess what? It worked. So way behind, he was way ahead of his time with that. Now, remember we're talking about he wanted to put wings on, and would we be able to put a set of wings on? He came up with different designs, and he determined early on that we were not strong enough to do that. How did he determine that? He came up with the first total gym, which is right over here. So I do not know if he sold membership to the club, Da Vinci's total gym outfit, but this is his total gym. He was able to tell your upper body and lower body strength, and he was able to figure out that, you know what? We were never going to be able to put on a set of wings. We just didn't have the strength, okay? So we end up with kind of the hang glider concept. But this is Da Vinci's total gym. Now, before we go into space, I'm going to tie Da Vinci into space. Because he did a lot of painting, sculpturing, and dissections, he studied anatomy a lot. He comes up with the Vitruvius man. That's the man on the wall over there behind us that we've all seen in that circle, okay? He says the belly button's the center of the body, fingertip to fingertip is how tall you are. He comes up with that. How do I tie that into space? Right behind you on this wall is NASA's Vitruvius man patch, okay? Here it is. How do you get that patch besides ordering on Amazon? You got to do a spacewalk or walk on the moon. Then you get to put that on your jacket, okay, and walk proudly into the cafeteria. So we got Da Vinci tied into space. Now, we all have probably something in common with Da Vinci. I know for me it's not IQ. Well, I'm not going near the 200 range, okay? Da Vinci, because he was so smart and he did so many things, he didn't finish everything. So he was a great starter and conceptual, but then he would move on to something else. So he didn't always finish everything when he did it. He ended up dying. He was 67 years old when he died, at the time which was kind of elderly, and he died in France. King Francis I had heard about him early on. He was the hottest guy in Europe at the time. And the king said, hey, I'm going to build you a house close to the castle with a tunnel underground to get into the castle. And that's why he ended up in France, and that's how the Mona Lisa ended up in France. Mona, by the way, in Italian is mother, mistress, or lady. So in essence, it's Mother Lisa or Lady Lisa. So her first name was Lisa, not Mona. Okay, now into space. And the one nice thing about this group is we all remember when it began, okay? When we get younger kids in, they have no idea. They have no clue. Okay, so, you know what? We'll come in a little more. It's easier if we meet right here. Oh boy, I gotta keep on moving. I'm talking too much. Okay. When did it begin? It began in 1957 in October. Russia launches Sputnik. That Sputnik right above us, that 23.5-inch metal ball that had a radio transmitter in it. All it did was beep. It didn't do anything else, just beep. But it scared the heck out of the U.S. government. Russia's in space now. They could see us. They could spy on us. The #1 song in 1957 you may have danced to back then, Elvis Presley, All Shook Up. That's what that did to the U.S. government, okay? And the other thing you may not have noticed in 57, okay, I was a young kid at the time in school, is that it was the first time In God We Trust was put on our currency. Okay? Yep, we probably weren't aware of that. First time it was on our coinage, but not in the currency until 57. Okay, enough of the Jeopardy questions. So, Russia's in there in October with Sputnik. U.S. launches our first satellite, Explorer, 4 months later, and that is Explorer. That is the size of it. 5 feet long, about 5 feet long, about 9 inches in diameter, very small. These things are much smaller than you kind of envisioned, I think, as we were growing up. But it went, and it did 4 things. It had scientific experiments. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belt. You're actually sitting in the wrong way. you gotta go the other way. So,
Mr. Collins.
so there you go. Okay.
Okay.
Grab the stick.
Okay.
There you go.
So, while we're all fascinating whether we're in the Mercury capsule, #1, you could see it is small. And if it's small, what does that mean the astronauts have to be? Small. Height limits for the... That started up. You hit the wrong button. Okay.
Oh, we got a checklist.
So,
Ready for blast off.
the astronauts could not be any taller than 5'11 or 175. None of them were 5'11 through the Apollo missions. You just couldn't fit in this capsule. The door was a third of this opening. You're in there with a spacesuit, okay? Strapped in the whole time, and a diaper. Okay, just to think how uncomfortable it is. Okay, now I'm going to tell you something that no one ever tells you. Walter Cronkite never said it. Alan Shepard, our first man in space, 15-minute suborbital flight, up and down, right? No need to have a diaper, right? Oh, a problem. He's on the launch pad 3 hours with a weather delay. He's got to urinate. They say, hey, we're not taking you out of the capsule. We turn the power off to the suit. You just went in your suit, okay? And he did. Ended up 15-minute flight, but he was there a long time. Now the real uncomfortable part of it, these guys, these early astronauts were nothing more than guinea pigs, okay? In other words, could man survive in space? That's what we're worrying about. So they were all censored up with wires. Alan Shepard, for his total time in the space capsule, had a rectal thermometer.
Oh my God.
So imagine having a rectal thermometer for 3.5 hours. Couldn't be comfortable. The second flight, they actually went to a sensor with Gus Grissom, okay? It's probably in the Smithsonian in a drawer, that thermometer, who knows, or something. So we had six flights in the Mercury, and we were able to determine man can survive in space, come back with all his marbles. But we want to get to the moon. So after the single-man capsule, we built the 2-man capsule, the Gemini, which we actually have hanging from the ceiling right over here. And that's our 2-man capsule. And we had 10 2-man missions. And what we had to do, to go to the moon, we had to do certain things. We had to do a spacewalk, but the Russians did it before us. We had to do a docking, we had to do a rendezvous, we had to change orbital elevation, and we had to stay in space at least 2 weeks to see if we were going to survive, if there were any other problems. The other thing is, these 6 missions in the Mercury capsule and the first 5 Gemini missions, the spacesuit you went up in was the spacesuit you came down in. You never got out of it. What does that mean? That means the astronauts in the Gemini had 3-day diaper. Imagine, not a 1 day, not 2 days, wearing it for 3 days in there. So Remember when they would land on the ship and Walter Cronkite would say, oh, they're just getting their sea legs back, and they're walking like that. And some of the guys told me there was more in there than just sea legs, okay? So that becomes kind of a problem later on to be addressed. But we did have that. We're passing the Russians at this time, and we want to get ready to go to the moon, okay? To go to the moon, we need a 3-man capsule. 1 guy to stay back, 2 to go to the moon. If there's a problem, at least we have the 1 coming back. And everyone can't wait to get into the capsule here, but I'm trying to keep this moving so we can get out on time. Behind us is the original Apollo 9 space capsule. So you can take a look at it, see how small it is, and then imagine spending 10.5 days in there with your 2 best friends. It is small, okay? We all have cell phones. Your cell phone has 1 billion times more capability than this. When you put the lunar lamp and attach it to the space to the Apollo capsule, total computer capacity is 64K. Kind of like the first Atari game. It was really, at the time, it's state of the art. We're really looking back, very, very primitive how we did it. But when you really take a look at it, you can see that you're really confined. There's no privacy. There are bathroom issues there. They didn't have diapers. They had baggies with stick on. It's a whole different process over there, and I can tell you about it later, but it's kind of fascinating. But anyway, we finally get to the moon. This is the first time we took the lunar lamp into orbit and worked its systems out, make sure everything was successful. Then Apollo 10, we went to the moon, got into space, the lunar lamp got within 50,000 feet, came back. Apollo 11, we landed. If the guys on 10 wanted to land because they were very close, NASA did not put any fuel in the ascent rocket. So if they were to land on their own, they were staying there, okay? Not that they didn't trust them, but maybe they didn't trust them. So we had 6 successful lunar landings. 12 men have walked on the moon. 4 of them are still alive. Charlie Duke was just here this last week. Charlie's 89, he's the youngest, and Buzz Aldrin is over 95. So they're getting up there in age. Now,
that's in years 67.
what's that?
Which year?
This one went up 69.
2 years later.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, this one was 68. 69 we landed. Yeah.
68 was Apollo 8, December.
Right, and then
69
was this.
9, 10, 11,
right.
July 20th.
Right, and we were going every 3 months. When you think of it, it was really something how fast we were moving.
Because of the decade was running out.
Yeah, and they wanted to get there what Kennedy had said, which was amazing that we
They were
did.
not ready to
Yeah.
push it.
So, I want to show you a couple artifacts that are kind of important because we all remember this when it happened. When Apollo 11 came back with those moon rocks, they came back with them in this box right here. So this box is the box that the original Apollo 11 moon rocks came back in. We're an adjunct to the Smithsonian, so we have stuff on loan from the Smithsonian. So this is an adjunct to that. You'll also notice in here there's a machete. Each one of the Apollo and Gemini missions had a machete in case they landed off course or so and they would need it for survival. So each one of the capsules had a machete. You have to make sure these guys are mentally stable because if you have a nightmare at night and you reach for this and start hacking, you're on your own. You know, nobody's going to come and get you. Now, have you seen Apollo 13, the movie? Okay, when they said, okay, stir the tank up, what was the tank they were stirring? It's right behind us. This is a liquid oxygen tank. So this is where the short was that blew up and ruined the Apollo 13 mission. This is an actual liquid oxygen tank right here. So if you go back and see the movie, okay, maybe you have it on where a group gathering, you watch the movie, and you see how small the capsule was and all. In the movie, things look a little bigger, but these things are really tight and small when you get to look at them up close. Now, while I have your attention, I want you to look up at this guy. That is the only GPS satellite on display in a museum in the world. Nobody else has one, okay? We have one that's a Boeing satellite from the 80s. We have 32 of them in orbit. Any given time, 26 of them, the 28 have to be working. You need 4 of them to pinpoint your location. 3 gets you close, you need 4 to do it. They're constantly trying to be hacked in by the North Koreans, the Russians, and the Chinese. Because if you can get into our system, you can disrupt everything. And in reality, we're trying to hack theirs. They're taken care of by the U.S. Space Force. Takes care of our things. This right here, this is a 1911 depression. They're showing it's a French plane. First plane to go 100 miles an hour. It's here because when it's too fragile to move. So they couldn't get it out of space. Okay, so let's move on. Just gotta keep it moving here so we can get you to the plus and noon. Okay, so this is a reproduction of Neil Armstrong's spacesuit right here. The one thing you can see as you look at it right off the bat is it's not that big, okay? Because remember, you couldn't be that big to fit in these capsules, okay? So, you know, you can kind of get a size there. On Earth, this suit weighed 180 pounds, okay? On the moon, because you guys are all astronomers, it weighed 30 pounds, because you know your weight is a function of gravity, and your mass is the same, but your weight is different. Charlie Duke's suit in Apollo 16 was over 300 pounds on Earth, so quite heavy. Most of that weight, though, is in the life support pack. That's why when you see the pictures of the astronauts, they're always flexed forward a little bit, because if you were to fall over, it'd be difficult to get on up. The other thing, with these spacesuits, you could not lift your arms above your shoulders, and you cannot reach across your body. And if you take a look at these gloves, you couldn't scratch your nose either. I mean, it's really cumbersome, okay? The spacesuit is made up of 13 layers of material. See this hose here? The first 2 layers are a mesh that circulates water to keep your body temperature constant. The next 2 are pressurization. The remaining is sewn together to keep you from getting a micrometeorite strike, because if you get a hole in the suit, you're done. Each one of the moonwalkers had rubber booties for that reason. No erosion on the moon, so the regolith, if it's jagged and you put a hole in your suit, you're done. But all the footprints look alike, because all the rubber booties have the same kind of imprint with it. The other thing with the spacesuit, look at the visor. The gold-plated visor, right? Why do I say, well, you can see yourselves in it, okay? Who was the first man on the moon? Neil Armstrong. Who are the one we see most of the pictures of from Apollo 11? Buzz Aldrin. Why? Neil Armstrong had the camera. And if you see the famous picture of him on the moon like this, and you look at the visor, you see Neil Armstrong's reflection with the camera, okay? So he was first, but Buzz got all the juice with the pictures. The other thing, NASA didn't know who was who on the moon because everyone looked alike in the spacesuit. So what do they do in Apollo 13? They said, we're going to put red stripes on the arms, the legs, and the helmet. Now we'll be able to tell who the commander is. Now, one funny story with this. Actually, the spacesuits are made by a company much better known for making women's undergarments.
Playtex.
That's what the men always say. The men say, like a nightgown. No, it's not a nightgown. Playtex. Okay? Now, there's a problem 3 days before the Apollo 17 launch. There's a problem with the spacesuit. They have to contact the woman that worked on that part of the spacesuit because they're all custom built. They get a hold of her. She'd never flown before. They got to fly her to Cape Kennedy, right, to make the repair, and to make sure she didn't lose it, they handcuffed it to her. Okay? So the first time she flew with a handcuff repair kit, she made the repair, everything went all fine. As I said, we should have a postage stamp with her picture on it, but we don't. Okay, so that's kind of a quick overview in space. As I said, we're on kind of a time thing, and I got an hour to kind of do the rest here. So from space, we're going to go into World War I, which for us history buffs know at the time, it was known as the Great World War, right? For the Allies. And it's not because of the plane per se, as much as it is the invention of the synchronized machine gun, okay? And we have a plane here. This is called the Fokker-Angecker, this plane. It's a single-wing plane, and if you look at it, it has these straps again, remember, like Blérios. So it does not have ailerons. It still uses wing warping. So it's not as maneuverable, but it has the propeller, the machine gun that you could fly, shoot through the propeller. And that really made it a deadly, deadly airplane. So early on, it's known as the Fokker Scourge. The Allies were losing a lot of people. Now, what is the Allies' answer to that? We're going to look up here. The Newport 11, the BB, and look where the machine gun is. it's on top of the wing. So now you're shooting above the arc of the propeller, okay? So it's not as accurate, but you don't shoot yourself down because you're not shooting your propeller down. But guess what this plane has? It has ailerons. So this plane is very, very maneuverable, okay? So the maneuverability then makes up for any lack of maybe straight-on accuracy. It goes back and forth with superiority. The Germans would have it for a few months, then the Allies would have it, and it would go back and forth. Now, the most iconic airplane in World War I is this triplane in front of us because it was flown by the Red Baron, and that's why it really is the most significant. In reality, it had about a 6-month operational superiority during the war. They only made 320 of them. The last one was destroyed in a bombing raid in 1945 in Berlin, okay? But because it's associated with the Red Baron, it really is famous. He had 20 of his 80 victories flying this plane. He had 48 of his victories flying variants of the Albatross above it. But that plane isn't as famous because he was killed flying in the red triplane. And because of the 3 wings, it's kind of a unique setup. Now, so I want you to remember a couple things about World War I. I want you to remember the pilots, okay? We're going to mention a little bit about them. It was very glamorous to be a pilot. You were the knights of the air, as opposed to being in the trenches. But you better have a good life insurance policy, because the average life expectancy was 2 to 3 weeks. That was it. And when you look at the great aces in the war, like the Red Baron, like McMahon, for the British, Baracca for the Italians, the Guynemer, the French, they were all killed during the war. So it was very, very deadly. It was glamorous, but it was a very, very, part to be in. And I want to mention, we had 2 Medal of Honors in World War I, American pilots, Eddie Rickenbacker, who survived the war, and a fellow named Frank Luke. And if you've heard of Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, it's a name in honor of Frank Luke. His total time in combat was 3 weeks before he was killed. So it was very, very deadly. Now, I'm going to tie something from World War I into something current today, and then I'm going to talk about the Italian ace, Francisco Baracca, okay? He was killed during the war. Remember I told you I'm Italian with Da Vinci, so I mentioned this, okay? So, he was killed during the war. He was in the cavalry before he was a pilot. And to honor his cavalry, on his airplane, he put a prancing stallion, okay? After the war, his parents go to an auto race in Sicily. Enzo Ferrari is driving for Alfa Romeo. Baracca's mother says, "Hey Enzo, put my son's prancing stallion on your car, it'll bring you good luck." Enzo says, "Okay." So you can Google a picture of his Alfa Romeo with, in the front of the radiator, in a circle, a prancing stallion. Now we're going to jump ahead a few years. 1947, Ferrari starts his own car company. He takes that prancing stallion. He takes yellow, which is the color of his hometown flag. He puts that stallion on that flag. He puts 2 letters on it, SF, stable of horses in Italian. That is the Ferrari motor car symbol, okay? Has nothing to do with cars, has everything to do with honoring Francisco Baracca, the leading ace. So, you may remember that. Now, there's something else you're going to remember, but we got to go around here to show you. Okay, so you guys have been great hanging in there, huh? I haven't lost anyone yet. We're trying to get through this so we can get through it, and hopefully you'll leave with a couple facts. You already know that Alan Shepard had a rectal thermometer, so that'll get you some money. Yeah? So no one wanted to be the first, you wanted to be second at that point. Okay, let's look. Most of the engines in World War I were called rotary engines. So look what happens when I turn the propeller. Look what happens to that engine. The engine turns with the propeller. So the engine and the propeller are fixed together. Rotary engine, it's spinning, okay? Creates a lot of torque though. So in the hands of an inexperienced pilot, it really is kind of difficult to fly. Because if you want to go to the right, the plane wants to go up 270 degrees. You want to go to the left, it wants to go down 70 degrees. So in an inexperienced pilot's hand, it was kind of dangerous. Now, with these planes, how do you control power if the engine and everything is spinning at the same time. If you've ever heard a rotary engine, they always go in spurts, like boom, boom, boom. What are they doing? In essence, you're turning the engine on and off. You're cutting the feed to the engine, the fuel. And that's how those planes kind of fly. It's the only way you can continue to fly it. But it would be difficult to imagine driving down the highway and every time you turned your car on and off that you wanted to go faster. Now, the other thing with these engines is they have this cowling kind of covering over here, okay? Most of them have it. These engines use castor oil for lubricant. And the castor oil would spit back from these engines. They were throwing that back. So these cowlings were not there for aerodynamic purposes. They were there to keep the pilots from sucking in all this castor oil. The pilots also had goggles and a scarf so they could kind of keep themselves clean. But guess what? They did swallow a lot of that castor oil. So the positive, it's always a positive, they were never constipated. Never constipated. Okay? Like grass through a goose. These guys never had that problem, sucking all that castor oil. Okay. Now, the thing you're going to remember, we're going to go right here. Okay. And we're going to look up at this plane here. And I want you to look at the wheels, and you'll see some cords. And I want you to look at the wheels here. Now, these planes did not have brakes, okay? They landed on grass fields. So they needed something for suspension. These coils were invented for airplane suspension. And every one of you knows what that coil is. It is it's a shock absorber, but what's the name of it? It's a bungee cord. So the bungee cord was invented for airplane suspension. Not to hold your ladder on your truck or your luggage on your car, okay? The bungee cord was invented for airplane suspension. Now, every one of these airplanes in the teens and in the 20s, every one of them has bungee cords. You will not find an airplane without bungee cords. The one that may surprise you is, remember we were at the Spirit of St. Louis, when you go back and look at it, above each wheel there's a cylinder. And you think that's where the shock absorber is. That is there for aerodynamic purposes. Take that cylinder away from it, and there are 8 bungee cords over each wheel. So even the Spirit of St. Louis had bungee cords. Now, talking about pilots, I don't want to remiss that the most famous American killed in World War I was named Quentin Roosevelt. And he was the son of President Teddy Roosevelt. Okay? He was the most famous American killed. When Lindbergh took off from Roosevelt Field on his historic flight, that field was named in honor of Quentin, the son. Most things named in the late teens and the 20s with Roosevelt's name is in honor of the son, Quentin, not of the president, okay? The other thing is, the Americans, we did not have a plane in the war. We flew the French planes or the British planes, okay? One of the reasons we did not have a plane in the war is that the Americans are great, terrific. We beat everybody else in the world at doing this, and that is suing. Okay? The Americans will sue over everything, okay? The Wright brothers had a very aggressive sister. She sued anybody that came up with anything that looked like the Wright brothers plane, so it kind of kept American aviation a little bit behind what they were doing in Europe. And when you look at aviation terms, like a fuselage, like ailerons, they're all French derivative. So we were a little bit behind them at that time, and we were flying the Allied planes with that. So, kind of a quick overview in World War I. Let's look at this airplane here. This guy here. Okay. Why do I want you to look at this airplane? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one is this was the airplane that the American pilots trained on. They trained on this Curtiss Jenny, a very, very stable flyer, okay? So it was very, very important. This is where the Americans trained on it. The other significance with this airplane is that this was the first airplane that was used for the airmail service. 1918, Reuben H. Fleet put in charge of the airmail service. Between 1918 and 1926, we had 41 airmail pilots. And if you think flying in World War I was dangerous, you didn't want to go near the mail pilots. Of those 41, 30 of them were killed in crashes. 75% mortality rate flying the mail. There was a pilot who flew the mail, crashed twice and got his nickname Lucky flying the mail, and that is Lindbergh. Lindbergh was an airmail pilot. He crashed twice. Now remember, Lindbergh's plane did not have a front-facing window. Lindbergh, when he flew, he kept the mail in the front seat. He flew in the back seat. You can't really see over the front of the nose by sitting in that back seat. So Lindbergh was used to flying by looking sideways and moving the plane back and forth. So he's a pilot. Now the bonus. As we walk on by, you're going to see the propeller. Now graze the propeller, and you can tell your friends you touched an airplane Lindbergh flew. Charles Lindbergh actually flew this airplane in the movie A Spirit of St. Louis, where Jimmy Stewart was played Lindbergh, okay? But he flew in there. And we have some other celebrity airplanes here. This was the Spirit of St. Louis. This guy here, remember that funny movie in 1963, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World? I think Sid Caesar and Buddy Hackett were flying that. That's the plane from the movie there. The plane behind us, the World War I plane, was in the movie Dawn Patrol, okay? And we're going to see another celebrity as we go around too in airplanes. But let's walk around. You can touch the propeller, and we're going to kind of go into the little more the golden age. There you go. Now you can touch the plane.
That's like the one you got me.
Yeah.
See how I mimic that?
Yeah, these were liquid cooled. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we'll get the group around here because this group is old enough to remember this.
Oh, here you see the
Okay,
wooden
that's
frame.
time frame. Yeah, it's tough. I like to tell too many stories. Okay, so as we go here, we're getting the back here. We're getting the cabooses, as I like to say. You know, they stopped using cabooses in the 80s on trains. Even though it's always fun to see a train with a caboose, they really don't use them now. Okay, so this group is old enough to remember when flying was actually glamorous. Okay, and when the flight attendants were 98% of whom were female, and they had height and weight restrictions, and they had uniforms. And these are some of PSA's uniforms, and get a load of that 60s outfit right there, huh?
That's the classic.
Yeah, what a classic, okay? Now, little story of PSA. That was an airline that started in California and had the smile on it, and of course, had unfortunately the crash here and all. But when they first started, you would walk up to the airplane at Lindbergh Field there at the airport, and you would just buy the ticket and get in the plane. Well, it started to get busier, and the guy who started it said, we need a ticket booth. So one night, if you've flown into San Diego, to the right of the airport is the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. One night he goes there with a couple of the guys, and they take the latrine. They steal one of the latrines and they bring it back to the airport and they paint it. And this is a model of the latrine that they stole. So the Marines show up the next day and go, hey, one of the latrines is missing. Not knowing where it is, it's the ticket booth for PSA. So they kind of absconded with that. So kind of the story behind this. So
That's where Ruth and I met 40 years ago.
40 years ago.
CRD.
Okay, FCRD, okay. Now, let's move in here. We're going to see another celebrity airplane.
You remember?
Oh, man, crazy. Okay, so, another celebrity airplane. As we go, we've all heard of Amelia Earhart, okay? And there was a movie that was done within the last decade called Amelia. I think it starred Hilary Swank. And this is the prop from the movie. Okay, so if you go back and rent the movie and you see her getting into that Lockheed Vega, this is it here. When the production company, when they were done with the movie, they said, hey, would you like it? Because it's a kind of a nice replica of it. The museum said, we'll take it. So this was Amelia Earhart's favorite plane to fly. She set 6 world records flying this. Now, remember May of 27, Lindbergh the first to fly non-stop solo. 5 years later to the day, Amelia Earhart in this plane was the second person to fly solo from New York to Paris. But she actually went from Newfoundland to Ireland, 15-hour trip, but she was the first, second after Lindbergh to do it. This is a 1932 plane, really, really advanced for its time. It doesn't have any wing supports. It has the cowlings for aerodynamics. Really, really designed. And remember in World War I, we had the cowling to keep you from the castor oil. This is the first airplane that this cowling here was actually designed for aerodynamic purposes. This plane goes 25 miles an hour faster with that cowling on than if you take it off. So it was the first one for that. Now, we'll move on through a little bit, and we're going to look over to the right. To the right is our famous kind of woman in aviation, the famous woman in aviation. And there's one woman in there that wasn't a pilot, okay? And you all know who she is. Sally Ride. Sally got a pilot's license after joining NASA. She was a scientist. But we do have Sally in there. But the other ones are all really accomplished female pilots. So now we're going to look at this stubby little plane here that looks like it really needs to go on a diet, right? This guy is really kind of fat and stubby. Significance of this airplane, this was the first, it set the land speed record in 1932, flown by Jimmy Doolittle, okay? Jimmy Doolittle flew this plane 294 miles an hour, and he gets out of it and he says, I do not have enough luck to fly this plane twice. That's how dangerous it was for a guy that took off from the aircraft carrier, the Hornet, on a one-way mission to bomb Tokyo, but he only had enough luck to fly this plane once. And this is in the golden age when they were going after lots of speed records and firsts and different things. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting with this, so this is the land speed record, land. The seaplanes were going 100 miles an hour faster. How could a seaplane with big pontoons go 100 miles an hour faster than this sleek this sleek airplane? Has to do with the propeller. These are all fixed pitch propellers. You cannot adjust them. So they had to be fixed for how much runway you had and maximum speed. If you're in a seaplane, you can set that propeller for maximum speed and take 3 miles to take off because you're on the water. So it made a little bit of a difference with it. Now, while we're here, I want you to look at this beautiful silver plane right there. Okay? That was built in San Diego. It's Ryan Sport Flyer. Beautiful, beautiful plane. Why do I point it out? Because Harrison Ford has one. And he crashes it. He's crashed it twice. If you look at his, though, he has yellow painted wings. Usually yellow wings mean it's a trainer. The way he flies, he is a trainer, okay? He shouldn't be flying anymore. He should be doing it all in front of a green screen. But I don't care about Harrison Ford. He's going to die, right? But we have very few of the planes left. We can't afford to lose the airplane. We can't afford to lose Harrison, but not the airplane. So let's move on through here. Oh, you got a good picture of the group?
That's a whole sailplane too.
No landing well. Yeah, this year only have one.
The big silver glider?
Okay, I'm moving along just time-wise. I can tell so many stories, but okay, well, we got to get this kind of stuff in, right? We only tell the good ones. Okay, so as we're kind of moving through, when you look at this plane behind us here, it kind of looks like the Spirit of St. Louis. And it really is kind of the Spirit of St. Louis on steroids, okay? A little bit bigger. But you see now, they're not going from New York to Paris, so now the pilot's in the front. You don't need that area for fuel. So this plane is here. It's actually here for a couple of reasons. Probably the most important reason is the guy who had it donated a lot of money, so he got to put the plane here, okay? It's the family of the fellow who flew this in Goodwill flights from California through South America, and every place he landed, there is an airport there now. So that's kind of the significance of the airplane. Now you all know this answer. What's in there? Yeah, you guys are all geniuses. See what you're learning already? Huh? So you're going to learn something else you may not know. We're going to go on this thing right here. Okay, so right here we have this really pretty looking airplane. Why is it here? It is the first all-metal fighter plane that the U.S. produced. Boeing did it in the 1930s. The problem with it is it still has World War I characteristics. It has fixed landing gear, has wings supports, and it has an open cockpit. So really, by the time the plane was done in the mid-30s, it was already obsolete. So what did Boeing do with them? Sold most of them to the Chinese that were fighting the Japanese in the 30s in their war before we kind of got involved. So this plane was used for that. Now, this is the other thing you're going to remember, okay? This airplane had 2 machine guns. It had a 30 caliber and a 50 caliber. And they shot through the propeller, so it was synchronized once again. Now here is the question. What is a caliber? Size of the bullet. So we got that down. Don't feel bad. I had 11 FBI agents in a tour a while ago. Every one of them had 2 guns, so I feel very safe. Okay? And I asked them what a caliber was. Not one of them knew. They knew the bigger one made a bigger hole. Okay? That was it. I had the police chief from San Diego. He was in. He was dressed in full gala. He looked like he was ready for a parade. And he had 2 guns. I said, hey, chief, what's a caliber? I don't know. So now you're going to know what a caliber is. A caliber is 100th of an inch. So what does that mean a 50 caliber bullet is? A half an inch. A 44 a little less, a 22 a little less than a quarter of an inch. So we use for our bullets 100th of an inch as a caliber. The British use 1,000th of an inch, which is crazy because they use a metric system for everything. But for their bullets, they use 1,000. So our 30 caliber is their 301, and most of the world uses millimeters 7.65. So a little bit different. But now you know what a caliber is, and that'll win you a beer anytime because most people don't know what it is. Just a unit of measurement. So now that's the other thing you got to remember. Now we're going to talk about this jet engine right here. This is an original Jumo 109 German jet engine. A British fellow named Whittle was the one who designed the jet engine at first. But the Germans were the first to actually put the jet engine into practical use. They did it flying the Messerschmitt 262, okay? With that jet engine in there, this plane went 100 miles an hour faster than our fastest fighter at the time. So it was a real improvement. But they were vulnerable when they were taking off and landing, okay? Because that's when they were slower speed. And if Hitler, you know, if they would have introduced into this plane earlier in the war, it would have probably protracted it a little bit longer. But it came in later in the war because they were fighting over what they wanted to do with the plane. Now, the interesting thing with the jet engine is this. It had a life expectancy of 15 to 20 hours. That's it. Imagine flying from, you know, LA to Auckland or something, then you got to change the engines, okay? Why? Because they didn't have the metallurgy. So it didn't really hold up as well. That's one fascinating fact with it. The other one is how do you start a jet engine? Today the pilot hits a button, there's an electric starter, it starts the compressor, and it starts the turbine going, and everything starts spinning in one direction. How did you start this? There's a 10 horsepower gas engine here, and it's located in the tower. And the way you start it, imagine a sophisticated airplane, you should have a guy on the ground, pull this cord out like you start this lawnmower. And that's how you started this jet engine. You got that going, and now it starts spinning the compressor and the turbine, and you get going. So with all its sophistication, it was started the way you would start your lawnmower today. But it was a tremendous achievement at that time. Not only with the jet engine, but it had swept-back wings. So this is all kind of new at that time. Now, as we go into World War II, we're going to talk about planes in the European theater and then the Pacific theater. And I'm going to check my clock. Good, I'm okay with time with you guys. So let's go and talk about the 3 iconic planes of the European theater. Now, remember, we kind of are all probably kind of kids, children of parents who were involved in the war, I'm guessing, okay? Now, the European theater was fought over land, okay? So the planes are different than the planes fought in the Pacific theater, which was fought over water. Now, talking a little bit about the European theater, that most of our casualties before we landed in D-Day, okay, were air crews, were our bomber crews, because we did not have airplanes that were able to escort the bombers from England to Germany and back. And a consequence of that is we lost 46% of our bomber crews were killed during the war. We lost 56,000 men flying bombers. An unbelievable high casualty rate until we were able to escort them. And one of the planes that changed that was this P-51 Mustang in front of me right here. So with this plane with drop tanks was able to escort the bombers back and forth, so it really made a difference. Prior to that, once they got over Germany, they were really sitting ducks, so that's what we lost most of them. Now, what's significant about the airplane? It has a wing that's called a laminar flow. Most wings, the thickest part is in the first third. In this plane, it's in the second third. It creates less drag. It's much more aerodynamic for this. The other thing is this airplane has a beautiful, beautiful big stout wing with a central spar going down it. Has 3 50 caliber machine guns in each wing. The landing gear is in the wing. Okay, so it supports the plane and everything. So it's a real stout wing. When we look at another plane, the German 109, which was their iconic plane, it's the model we have hanging upside down right here. Look at how tiny that wing is. Real short wing. The armament is in the fuselage. The landing gear actually is attached to the fuselage. So these wings were easy to be replaced. Matter of fact, in cost, you could build 3 Messerschmitts for the cost of 1 Spitfire because of how simply it was made. But it was a very good, capable fighter, but totally different wing design than, let's say, than our P-51. Now, remember we talked about Ferrari, the World War I, the Ferrari symbol? This is P-51 Mustang. This airplane was named after the horse. The Ford Mustang car, named after this airplane. The head designer of the car was a World War II aviation enthusiast. His favorite plane was a P-51 Mustang. So even though you see that horse on that car is named in honor of the P-51 of the airplane. But the plane is in honor of the car. So when we look at it, so we got the German 109. They made over 35,000 Messerschmitts. Okay. They stopped producing it in 1955. And you go, wait a minute, the war was over at 45. The Czechs were producing that plane using a British Rolls-Royce engine until 1955. The last fighter squadron was a Czechoslovakian fighter squadron that was still using this plane between 63 and 65, 1963 and 65. They were flying the Messerschmitt 109. So really a plane with a long life when you look at it in that sense. So let's turn around and let's look at the British Spitfire. And as you look at these planes, I want you to look at how sleek they are. They are sleek because all of the planes, almost all the planes in the European theater used liquid-cooled engines. Okay? V12 liquid-cooled engines, which means all of these planes have a very sleek look to them, okay? A real sports stout. I mean, we're very aerodynamic. When we get to the Pacific theater, they're all blunt because of the engine. So, let's look here. Right here we have our Spitfire, the British iconic airplane, okay? Just a famous plane. Of course, it helped stand the Battle of Britain. But most of the successes that the British had fighting the Germans during the Battle of Britain, they were flying a model of this plane right here, this Hawker Hurricane, that was still a fabric-covered fuselage. Why? They had twice as many of them. It was just a numbers game. So the Spitfire, the P-51 has a big, stout, strong wing, laminar flow. The 109 has a short wing. The Spitfire has a very thin wing. Thin and elliptical in shape. Very different shape. All great fighters, all totally different wings. Now, the end of a wing provides no lift. The only thing you get at the end of a wing is turbulence, okay? What do we see now on all the commercials? commercial airplanes. Winglets. But that's only the last 15, 20 years. So all of that time before that, you'd think someone would have said, hey, we got to put these winglets on. Because the end of a wing doesn't provide any lift. So those winglets really help in lower speed. It's more functional. So kind of an interesting scenario with that. Now, the European theater, just to give you a little bit of an idea, so most of our losses were bomber crews, okay? We hit the land in June, D-Day. 14 months later, really, the European war is over. So we're only in mainland about 14 months before the troops are coming back. Pat is going, though, through North Africa and Italy in 1942. So when you want to look, I just briefed, I was thinking about it. The Ukraine war right now has been going on over 3 years. Our time in World War II was 14 months on the mainland. If you count Pat coming through Italy, it was 3 years. So really, in the time frame, what was accomplished then and what they're fighting over now, I know it's crazy when you look at it in that time frame. So let's go into the Pacific Theater. Before we do it, though, I'm going to tell you something about Rolls-Royce. Once again, as you look at all these planes in the European theater that was flown over land, powered by liquid-cooled engines, they all have sleek snouts, right? When we go to the Pacific Theater, every one of them is blunt because they use a air-cooled radial engine. A little different. Now, anybody own a Rolls-Royce? I'm sure most of the crowd does. Just don't want to raise your hand. Okay. The Rolls-Royce engine was a fabulous engine, okay? Now, Rolls-Royce, when America was building the P-51, they said, hey, we need 10,000 of them. Rolls-Royce said, we can't produce them, we're doing them by hand. No way. So they sold the patent to the Packard Motor Car Company. We're old enough to remember that there was a Packard, okay, when we were kids. Then we were able to mass produce them, okay? But let's go back to this. Rolls-Royce, with a hyphen in there. Who are they? Okay? Something else you're going to remember. Rolls was an aviation enthusiast. Remember, Blériot was the first to fly the English Channel. Rolls was the first to fly the English Channel back and forth in 1910. But he only got to enjoy it for 1 month before he was killed flying a Blériot 11. So not only was he the first to fly back and forth, he's the first English aviation casualty. It's Rolls, okay? Now, who's Royce? Royce is born in poverty, but very, very mechanically inclined. From a young age, he builds little engines. Later on, he ends up with his own little engine manufacturing company. He saves up money, and what does any young man do when you have a few bucks? First thing you do instead of buying a house is you buy a car. So Royce buys a car, and guess what? The car keeps breaking down. And Royce says, I can build a better car than this. So in 1906, he builds his Gray Ghost. Now he has this wonderful, reliable car. What am I going to do with it? Well, I'd like to sell it. How am I going to sell it? Guess what Rolls did? He's an aviation enthusiast, but what did he do? He sold cars. So Royce gets a hold of Rolls. They end up forming a partnership to sell the cars. And that's Rolls-Royce. Interesting thing, Royce had to be a terrific guy in the sense that the partnership was only 4 years old when Rolls was killed. Royce lived until 1933. He could have easily early on said, you know what? Rolls is gone, it's going to be the Royce car, and he kept his name. So that's kind of a testament to the man right there. Now, I'm going to check my time. Good, I'm in good time, I'll tell you another story. Okay, we're going into the Pacific Theater. When we go into the Pacific Theater, we're going to look at this airplane right above us here. The Dauntless SBD dive bomber. SBD stands for, the pilots say slow but deadly. In reality, it's Scout Bomber Douglas. Okay, who makes it? Now, why am I going to talk about this airplane? Well, there's one professional baseball player that flew combat in 2 wars. No. But you're ahead of me. Jerry Coleman. Okay, if you're a Padre fan, he was our announcer. Jerry Coleman won 5 World Championships with the Yankees. He was their second baseman in the 50s. He flew during World War II the Dauntless dive bomber, and in the Korean War, he flew the Corsair. Now, there was another very, very famous American baseball player went to Hoover High School in San Diego.
Ted Williams.
Ted Williams, right. And Ted Williams was a terrific pilot, but he did not fly combat in World War II. He stayed home and was an instructor on the Corsair. The war ends, he's still in the reserves. The Korean War breaks out, okay? Ted Williams is called back up. Now, supposedly the story goes, the government really didn't want to call him because he was a famous baseball player, but there were a lot of Ted Williams, so, have a common name and they end up getting him. So he comes back. Now for the Korean War, he's trained to fly F-9 jets, and he is assigned a fighter group in Korea. And Ted Williams becomes the wingman to a famous American individual later on. He was not famous at the time. He was just a hotshot pilot.
Neil Armstrong.
3 victories.
Neil Armstrong.
Nope, not Armstrong. We're in that vein.
John Glenn.
John Glenn. Ted Williams was John Glenn's wingman during the Korean War. For 25% of Glenn's flights, Ted Williams was a wingman. So 2 iconic Americans, paired together in a conflict, which is kind of an interesting thing. Now, back to the aviation. The SBD dive bomber. It's a carrier-based airplane without folding wings, okay? It carried a bomb here, it could carry a 500-pound bomb here. You see this loop here, the support? That was to drop down, so when you drop the bomb, you didn't hit the propeller, okay? Now it's a dive bomber, which means it's coming in at a very steep angle. Hence it has these holes, these dive brakes are called, okay, in the wings there. Why? This way you can come in at a steep angle, but slow enough that you can drop the bomb accurately and still pull out, okay, with it. So, interesting. Now, this plane has the lowest loss rate of any plane in the Pacific. The lowest. They made over 5,400 of these. They lost less than 200 of them. Why? Mission, okay? If you're a dive bomber, very difficult to shoot as you're coming down at that angle. Where the torpedo bombers, which we just have a model of up here, this small model, the torpedo bombers are coming in low off the deck, right, the ship is right there, had the highest loss rate of any of the planes. In the Battle of Midway, only a couple of them of the 32 survived. They were all shot down. So mission has a lot to do with survivability with it. So, and the other thing, as we go into the Pacific Theater, remember the Pacific Theater is fought over water, okay? European over land, Pacific over water. So we use a different engine. We use an air-cooled engine, a radial engine right here. They're shorter and stouter. They're perfect for a carrier-based airplane. The other thing is, if you knock a cylinder out on this, that engine's still going to function. Where if you get involved in the cooling system of a liquid-cooled engine, it seizes up and you're done. And you could crash land on land. Crash landed in the Pacific, you're probably gone. So they use a little different engine, and because of that, all of the airplanes have a different snout. Now, before we go on there, this is some more trivia that's kind of fun. Okay? What do you think was the most expensive project the U.S. government was involved in World War I producing? Not tanks.
World War I.
It's a plane. The most expensive project in World War II was the B-29 bomber. Figure how many millions of dollars they spent, a couple billion at that time. The B-29, it was a high-altitude bomber, could carry a 10,000-pound bomb, fly great distances, different engines. That was the most expensive. What was the second most?
Manhattan Project.
The Manhattan Project. Okay. What was the third most? The Norton bomb site, which we have over here. Here it is, that little thing there, right here. The Norton bomb site. Why do I mention them? Because I'm going to put them all together. The B-29 carried the atomic bomb, dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki using a Norton bomb site. So those 3 projects really can come together in that order. That bomb site, it got you close. It's not like now where it didn't come through your bathroom window. The best that bombs, it got you within the vicinity because it had to take into fact, a lot of things that they just really couldn't control. But that's why kind of 3 projects kind of came together. So we'll go into the Pacific Theater, and as we look at it, I wanted to start early on in the conflict. Early on in the conflict. Where's my group here? Here it is. Here. Okay. Early on in the conflict, the American plane was the Wildcat, the Grumman Wildcat up here. And it was a really, really terrific plane, okay? But it was inferior to the Japanese Zero, which we have above us, okay? This plane was fished out of Tokyo Harbor, okay? So it wasn't a carrier-based plane, but very, very, rare that there aren't a lot of them around. So the Japanese Zero was shooting us down at a 6-to-1 ratio, okay? This plane was very, very light, very, very fast, very, very maneuverable, but it did have a couple shortcomings. One shortcoming, it did not have self-sealing fuel tanks, which means if you put a hole in it, it was on fire. So if you see a lot of World War I pictures of a Japanese Zero, they're always burning. That was one of the reasons. The other thing is the pilot is dying for the Emperor, so there's no need to really put any armor around them. Where the Americans protected the lives, and we had a lot more armor around our pilots. So, but it was a terrific plane, and I'll tell you this, you could still buy the car, but you can't buy the airplane. Who made the airplane? Mitsubishi, right? So you can still buy the car, but not the airplane. The interesting thing with that is if you look at the World War II with the German companies, Porsche, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, they were all making war machines, okay? And they all survived the war. So they're big industrial companies, no matter what it is, they seem to survive. So good to have them in your portfolio, I guess. So we're losing planes at a 6-to-1 ratio. The U.S. says we need a better plane. So Grumman comes up with the Hellcat right here. It's a faster plane, it's better armored, it's more maneuverable, it's really stout, it's a great, great fighter. All of a sudden now, we're shooting the Japanese down in a 19-to-1 ratio. Part of that is the Japanese lost most of their good pilots in the Battle of Midway. Okay, so the Japanese were less experienced pilots at this time, but the plane was still a superior plane. So we were flying that. These are all carrier-based planes. And then we have the Corsair come later on. The Corsair is the largest propeller-driven engine of any of the World War II fighters. Because the propeller is so large, because it has this huge engine in there, the wings would have been straight. And if they had straight wings, the landing gear would have been huge, and it would have been susceptible to collapse. So to fix that, they used a reverse gull wing, where the wings are bent. Now you have short landing gear, you can carry more ordnance underneath it, and it proves to be aerodynamically superior with the bent gull wing. It's not a first, because the German Stuka had that, but it was used in the Corsair. The problem with the Corsair is that the pilot is located really far back if you see where the cockpit is. So you can't see over the front when you're landing on a carrier. So they did what the British did. You would come in on the side, look at the carrier, and then circle around and land at the last minute, okay? Because you could not see over it. The Marines used this, if you remember the show Baba Black Sheep with Pappy Bollington. The Marines used it when it was land-based with it. So that's kind of a quick overview in the Pacific. Just the important thing to remember is the engines and the planes look different because it was fought over water. Where the European theater, they're liquid-cooled engines, much sleeker looking because one of them is fought over land. So we're going to move into kind of the jet age a little bit, and then you're almost done with me. As we walk in here, you can look up here and you'll see there's a bicycle chain, okay? And to show you how primitive these things were at that time, that bicycle chain is attached to the landing gear, and the way this pilot would retract the landing gear after he took off on the plane, he's going to have the hand crank the landing gear with the bicycle chain to get the wheels up. Kind of funny in that sense. Okay. Okie dokie. So as we go in, we really don't have very much on the Korean War per se in the museum. So we kind of move a little bit to Vietnam. And this plane here, the A4 Skyhawk, Douglas A4 Skyhawk right here, is once again, it's a carrier-based airplane with fixed wings. Remember the Dauntless carrier-based fixed wings? Guess what? The designer of that and the designer of this, Heinemann, well, people say I look like in that portrait over there, designed both airplanes, okay? Now, interesting, the Dauntless, remember, had the lowest loss rate of any plane, okay? This plane had the highest loss rate in Vietnam of any Navy plane. John McCain was flying one of these when he was shot down and became a prisoner. Why did it have the highest loss rate? Mission. Remember the Dauntless dive bombing, difficult to hit. This was to drop bombs, okay? To drop bombs accurately, you had to be lower. To be lower, you're more susceptible to ground fire, and you had the highest loss rate. So mission has a lot to do with the success of it. So, as I said, McCain flew this. You want to see, remember how small those cockpit, the astronauts had to be to fit in those capsules? This is the cockpit of this airplane. And it is small. I mean, I guess small, you know, maybe you could get in, I don't know. But getting out may be a problem. But they're trying to know, Fred's a pilot over there. Huh, Fred? Kind of tight, you know? Yeah, I think very, very tight. So, now, as we kind of move on through, we got a couple drones. This is a Grumman drone, this helicopter. So the older one, kind of big, right there. Right next to it, we have a supersonic target drone, okay? We have subsonic, but we have supersonic, and this is a supersonic one that's used in missiling for target practicing. Okay, now what do you think? The guys always kid me. People have said, is that you? What's the resemblance? Is it the nose and the glasses or what, huh? Something like that? Okay, and Heinemann. Okay, so we'll go around here. We'll talk a little bit. We're going to talk about a jet engine, and we'll talk a little bit about the F-18. Okay, so we have here a Hornet and F-18, and it's painted in the Blue Angel colors. Now, the interesting thing with the Blue Angels is when you see them perform, and they're fabulous to watch them perform, they are using the oldest model of a jet still that we're using, okay? They're not going to use the latest model for a demonstration flight. That's kept for the front line. They're going to use the oldest model of the plane. So this is an older model of F-18. Now the Super Hornet, this is a huge carrier plane. Look at the Super Hornet is 10 feet bigger than this. It is a huge, huge airplane. So, interesting. Now some people say it's a biplane. And you say, how could it be a biplane? It only has one wing. This leading edge right here, this wing right here acts as a wing. So you have this wing, and then the other more traditional looking wing. So, now, what are we going to learn? We learned a couple things. We learned bungee cords. We learned Ferrari.
Diapers.
We learned the diapers, the thermometer, what a caliber is. Huh? We've learned all these things. Okay, so now we're going to learn how does a jet engine function. Okay, so a jet engine functions, every one of them functions in the same principle. And they're real easy. There are going to be 4 words that you're going to remember. Okay? Every jet engine has to suck air in, okay? Once it sucks the air in, it has to squeeze the air with the compressor. As that air is squeezed and heated, it is thrown into the blast chambers, where there's a constant feed of fuel. Once you get the blast in there, the result of that is the burn is the blast out that's going to turn, in essence, a Dutch windmill, okay, over here, the turbine, and that is going to send your exhaust. And as our friend Newton says, for every reaction is a reaction. If you get this going out that way, then this is going to go this way. So, what are the 4 words we're going to break down? Remember that the air is squeezed, is sucked, rather. Then it is squeezed, okay, in the compressor. Then it is burned. and then it is blown out or blasted out. So suck, squeeze, burn, blow. Every jet engine basically works in that concept, okay, with it. Now, if you look at the compressor, you will see that the blades in the front are bigger and they get smaller in the back. And that is, the air is compressed, it's being heated, but it also has to be thrown in that direction. What you don't see here is these stator blades. There's a blade, for every one of these rows of blades, there's a stationary row of blades, okay? And that forces the air that way. Otherwise, it would just continue to spin. So it does force it in that thing. Now, the other thing you may not know, and I didn't know it, is that no jet engine can function with supersonic air going into it, right? So how does an airplane like this F-18 go over Mach if the engine cannot work with supersonic air? What happens is, in front of the engine, and the best example, the easiest one to see is when you walk in the museum, there's that A-12, like the SR-71, people think it is, and in front of the engine is a big cone. That cone goes in and out, and it creates a shock wave. In a nanosecond, you create a shock wave to slow the speed of the air down. This plane has a couple designs in here. So that air going into this jet engine at supersonic speed is subsonic. Otherwise, a jet engine can't function, okay, with it. Now, remember when they did the Bell X-1 in 1947, they used the rocket engine. Because they really didn't know this, and they didn't have any jet engine that could go supersonic on the speed of sound, because it won't. Okay, you have to have that shock wave that you create in front of it, and that slows the air down. So, little something with that. So, I kind of kept time-wise, I think, yeah, pretty good with you. I had a lot more stories, but I couldn't get to all of them. But now I have a big question for you astronomers. Okay. I don't know if anyone can answer it. So, we know the universe is expanding, right? Is it expanding into something, or is it creating its own space as it's expanding?
Creating its own space.
You say creating its own space. But what's it creating into? Who knows? Cosmology, we'll get into that later. Kind of crazy. That's always kind of fascinating. What's happened that way or that. So I hope we learned a couple things. So we know bungee cords, we know caliber, we know the Ferrari symbol, we know the Ford Mustang, we know that you didn't want to be the first astronaut because of that rectal thermometer. You want to stay away from that. What else are we doing? There are a couple other things that we had in there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and we kind of got you out on time. And where are you going from here? Something? Seaport Village. Oh, okay, so we get something nice to eat there. Great. Thank you a lot, guys. Thank you guys for being great and patient putting up with me. I'm sorry I couldn't get it. If I did it again tomorrow, I'd tell you different stories. It's okay. I'm trying to get you some stories. Thank you so much. Okay, guys.
Question.
Yes.
How did the tanks that you say that the fuel tanks of the Japanese weren't self-sealing?
They weren't.
How were the Americans made self-sealing?
It was a compound, it was kind of a rubbery compound that as soon as you put a hole in it, it would self-seal.
Thank you.
And they use it like with the race cars and stuff, use them now, because early on, those fires were terrible.
You did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to get it in, being conscious and speed. Oh yeah, yeah.
Covered, it's a hospital for you for me. Covered. And then they sent this